The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Riverside, Arizona, as Deputy Marshal Thomas McKenna adjusted his badge one last time before entering Sheriff Harrison's office. The year was 1892, and the desert heat was already building despite the early hour. Thomas had been a lawman for 12 years, earning respect throughout the territory for his unwavering dedication to duty and his ability to bring in fugitives without unnecessary violence. "McKenna!" Sheriff Harrison called out without looking up from the papers scattered across his worn wooden desk. "Got a job for you. Simple one this time." Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. At 42, he had seen enough of frontier justice to know that nothing was ever truly simple. "What's the situation, Sheriff?" Harrison finally looked up, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man who had made too many difficult decisions. "Apache girl, maybe 15 years old, been causing trouble up north near Flagstaff, stealing food, disrupting trade routes, inciting other young natives to rebellion. The merchants are demanding action." "Just one girl?" Thomas asked, raising an eyebrow. "Don't let that fool you. Name's Ayana, means eternal blossom in Apache, but she's been nothing but thorns for the settlers. Orphaned when her village was relocated about 2 years back. Since then, she's been a ghost in the desert, appearing just long enough to cause problems before vanishing again." Thomas studied the wanted poster Harrison handed him. The sketch showed a young face with defiant eyes and traditional Apache features. The reward was modest, $50, suggesting this was more about making an example than genuine concern for her crimes. The territorial governor wants her brought in before other tribes start getting ideas. You know how it is, Thomas. One rebellious youth can inspire a dozen others. Take her to the reservation in San Carlos. They'll know how to handle her properly. Thomas folded the poster and tucked it into his vest pocket. San Carlos Reservation had a reputation for breaking spirits along with resistance. "Any family left? Anyone who might be looking for her?" "None that matter," Harrison replied curtly. "Her people are scattered to the winds. This girl is alone, which makes her dangerous. Desperate people do desperate things." As Thomas prepared to leave, Harrison added, "Take the train north to Flagstaff, then track her from there. Word is she's been seen near the old mining camps in the foothills. And Thomas, don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. She may be young, but she's still Apache, still a threat to peaceful settlers." The train journey north gave Thomas time to think. As the desert landscape rolled past his window, he found himself studying the wanted poster again. Something about the girl's eyes in the sketch bothered him. They held pain, not malice. In his years as a lawman, he had learned to read faces, even sketched ones. This didn't look like the face of a hardened criminal. Flagstaff was a bustling frontier town, fed by the railroad and surrounded by pine forests that provided a stark contrast to the desert below. Thomas spent his first evening gathering information at the local saloons and trading posts. The stories he heard painted a complex picture. "She's like a ghost," said Pete Morrison, a grizzled prospector who claimed to have seen her twice. "Shows up at camps when folks are away, takes just enough food to survive, never touches personal belongings, never causes damage. It's like she's trying not to be noticed." Martha Whitman, who ran the general store, had a different perspective. "She spooked my customers last month, standing outside in traditional dress, just watching. People around here are nervous enough without having wild Indians lurking about." But it was young Billy Chen, whose family ran the laundry, who provided the most telling detail. "I saw her help old Mr. Patterson when his mule threw a shoe outside town. She could have robbed him easy, but instead she helped him fix it and guided him to safety before disappearing. Didn't seem dangerous to me." That night, Thomas lay in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, the wanted poster on the nightstand beside him. 12 years of law enforcement had taught him that the truth usually lay somewhere between the official version and the stories people told. Tomorrow, he would begin tracking Ayana, but something deep in his gut told him this assignment would be different from any other. Thomas began his search at dawn, following leads that took him through dense pine forests and rocky canyons. The Apache girl had chosen her territory well. The terrain was difficult for horses, with numerous caves and hidden passages that could provide shelter. As an experienced tracker, Thomas could see signs of her presence. Carefully concealed fire pits, footprints in soft earth that suggested she moved mostly at night, and evidence of someone living off the land with minimal impact. On his second day of tracking, Thomas encountered Jake Forrester, a cattle rancher whose land bordered the search area. Forrester was a large man with sun-weathered skin and suspicious eyes that seemed to catalogue Thomas's every movement. "About time the law showed up," Forrester said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "That Apache girl has been nothing but trouble. Scared my men, disturbed my cattle. I've got a business to run." "Tell me exactly what she's done," Thomas said, pulling out his notebook. "Well, she's been seen on my property. That's trespassing right there. And my men report strange sounds at night, like Apache war cries. Could be calling in more of her kind for all we know." Thomas pressed for specifics, but found Forrester's accusations were mostly based on fear and prejudice rather than concrete evidence. The rancher's main complaint seemed to be the girl's mere existence rather than any specific criminal act. Later that afternoon, Thomas finally caught sight of Ayana. She was kneeling by a stream in a remote canyon, filling a makeshift water container. From his hidden position behind a boulder, Thomas observed her for several minutes. She moved with the grace and wariness of someone who had learned to survive alone in hostile territory. Her clothes were a mixture of traditional Apache garments and practical frontier wear, all showing signs of careful mending and long use. What struck Thomas most was how young she appeared. The wanted poster had suggested a hardened criminal, but the girl he watched was clearly just trying to survive. She was thin, though not malnourished, and her movements suggested constant alertness rather than aggression. As Thomas considered his approach, a rattlesnake slithered from behind a rock near where Ayana knelt. Without thinking, Thomas called out a warning. "Snake! Behind you!" Ayana spun around, spotted the serpent, and moved away with fluid grace. But now she had also spotted Thomas. Their eyes met across the canyon, and for a moment neither moved. Thomas saw intelligence in her gaze, along with the wariness of a wild creature cornered by a predator. "I'm Deputy Marshal McKenna," Thomas called out, slowly standing with his hands visible. "I'd like to talk to you, Ayana." The girl studied him for a long moment before responding in accented but clear English. "You are here to take me to the reservation." It wasn't a question. Thomas was struck by the resignation in her voice, not defiance or anger, but the weary acceptance of someone who had expected this moment. "That's my assignment, yes," Thomas admitted. "But I'd like to hear your side of the story first." "There is no story," Ayana replied, her voice steady despite her obvious youth. "I am Apache. I exist where white men do not want me to exist. That is crime enough." Thomas took a careful step forward. "The charges say you've been stealing food and inciting rebellion. Is that true?" For the first time, something like fire flashed in Ayana's eyes. "I take only what I need to live. I speak to no one, except when necessity requires it. If my presence alone is rebellion, then I am guilty. Why not go to the reservation? You'd have food, shelter, protection." Ayana's laugh was bitter beyond her years. "Protection? From whom? The same soldiers who burned my village? The same government that promises food but delivers death? I have seen San Carlos, Marshal. I have seen what your protection does to my people." Thomas felt something twist in his chest at her words. He had been to San Carlos himself, had seen the conditions there. The girl spoke truth, even if it was truth he wasn't supposed to acknowledge. "Your village. What happened?" he asked quietly. "We were peaceful. We farmed, we traded, we bothered no one. But the settlers wanted our land for their cattle, so the soldiers came, said we had harbored raiders, said we were a threat. They burned everything. My family..." She paused, composing herself. "My family chose to die as Apaches rather than live as prisoners." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of history and injustice. Thomas found himself seeing the situation through new eyes, not as a lawman pursuing a fugitive, but as a man confronting the human cost of policies he had spent years enforcing without question. "You're alone," Thomas said finally. "Yes." "For 2 years?" "Yes." "That's no life for anyone, especially not someone your age. You deserve better." Ayana straightened, her chin lifting with pride. "I deserve to live as my ancestors lived, free." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding dawning. This girl wasn't a criminal. She was a survivor, the last free member of a destroyed people, clinging to dignity in a world that had decided she had no right to exist on her own terms. "I could take you in," Thomas said carefully. "But I don't think that would solve anything." Then what do you propose, Marshal?" Thomas looked at this brave, lonely child and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I propose we talk more. Are you hungry?" For the first time since he had spotted her, Ayana's guard seemed to lower slightly. "Always." Thomas smiled and began unpacking supplies from his saddlebags. "Then let's start there." Thomas spread out his meager provisions on a flat rock between them. Hardtack, jerky, and canned peaches he had been saving for a special occasion. As they shared the simple meal, he found himself learning about a life he had never imagined. Ayana told him about her survival techniques, how she had learned to find food and water in the harsh desert, how she avoided settlers and soldiers while staying alive through 2 brutal winters. She spoke of her family, her father, who had been a respected warrior and later a peaceful farmer, her mother, who had taught her the old stories and the old ways, her younger brother, who had died defending their home at only 12 years old. "They called my father a renegade," Ayana said, breaking a piece of hardtack with practiced efficiency. "But he never raised a weapon against anyone who did not first raise one against us. When the soldiers came, he tried to surrender, to negotiate. They shot him while he held his hands in the air." Thomas found himself sharing his own story, how he had become a lawman after losing his farm to drought and debt, how he had believed that enforcing the law meant protecting the innocent, how years of frontier justice had slowly worn down his certainty about right and wrong. "I have a daughter," Thomas admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "Had a daughter. Sarah. She died of fever when she was about your age. My wife followed a year later. That's when I put on the badge, thought keeping others safe might give my life meaning again." Ayana studied his face with those intelligent eyes. "Yet here you are, sent to cage another man's daughter." The observation hit Thomas like a physical blow. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose I am." As the sun began to set, Thomas made a decision that went against every protocol he had been trained to follow. "Show me where you've been living." Ayana hesitated, then led him to a carefully concealed cave high in the canyon walls. The shelter was small, but efficiently organized, a place for sleeping, a fire pit positioned to disperse smoke, stored food and water, even a collection of books she had somehow acquired. "You can read?" Thomas asked, examining a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "My mother learned from missionaries when she was young. She taught me." Reading helps pass the long nights. Thomas picked up another book, a basic primer on medicinal plants. You've been treating yourself? And others, when I can. There was an old prospector last winter, hurt bad in a mine collapse. I helped him heal. But you never approached him directly. Apache girl helping white man, that would bring soldiers faster than stealing ever would. Thomas began to understand the impossible situation Ayanna faced. She was compassionate and intelligent, with skills that could benefit any community, but her very existence was seen as a threat by the people she might help. Ayanna, Thomas said carefully, what if there was another way? What if you didn't have to choose between the reservation and hiding in caves? What do you mean? Thomas wasn't entirely sure what he meant, but he pressed on. What if someone was willing to vouch for you, to take responsibility? No white person would do such a thing for an Apache. This white person might. Ayanna stared at him in the gathering darkness. You would lose your badge, your livelihood, everything you have worked for. Maybe it's time I started working for something different. They talked through the night, sharing stories, fears, and hopes. Thomas learned about Apache traditions, about a worldview that saw all living things as connected, about a people who had been labeled savage for refusing to abandon their way of life. Ayanna learned about Thomas's losses, his growing disillusionment with a system that seemed to punish the innocent as often as the guilty, his longing for a purpose that aligned with his conscience rather than his paycheck. As dawn approached, Thomas made a proposal that surprised them both. Come back to Riverside with me, not as my prisoner, but as my daughter. I'll adopt you legally, give you my name, my protection. You'll be safe. They will never accept an Apache daughter of a white lawman. Then we'll go somewhere they will. California maybe, or up to Oregon. Start fresh. Ayanna was quiet for a long time, staring out at the canyon where she had hidden for 2 years. To accept your offer would mean abandoning everything I am. Not abandoning, Thomas said gently. Adapting. You've already proven you can survive anything. This would just be a different kind of survival. And you, what would you be giving up? Thomas thought about his badge, his reputation, his standing in the community he had served for over a decade. Nothing that matters as much as doing what's right. As the sun rose over the canyon, painting the rocks gold and red, 2 unlikely companions prepared to face an uncertain future together. Thomas McKenna had come to Arizona to capture a fugitive, but instead he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A chance to be the father he had lost the opportunity to be, and to protect someone who deserved protection rather than persecution. The journey back to Riverside took 3 days, during which Thomas and Ayanna worked out the details of their new arrangement. Thomas would report that he had tracked the fugitive, but found her already dead, a story that would satisfy his superiors while protecting Ayanna's identity. She would take the name Anna McKenna and present herself as a distant relative he had agreed to take in after family tragedy. However, their plans began to unravel as soon as they reached town. Sheriff Harrison was waiting at Thomas's boarding house with Jake Forrester and 2 other ranchers, all looking grim and determined. "McKenna," Harrison called out as Thomas dismounted, his eyes immediately fixed on Ayanna. "This the Apache girl?" Thomas felt his heart sink, but he kept his voice steady. "Sheriff, I'd like you to meet Anna, my ward. She's been living with relatives up north, but circumstances have changed." Forrester stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Don't try to play us for fools, Marshal. That's the same girl I saw on my land. Same face, same build. You think a change of clothes makes her someone different?" "Jake's right," added Bill Watson, another rancher. Words already spread that you were tracking an Apache fugitive. Now you ride back with an Apache girl and expect us to believe it's a coincidence." Sheriff Harrison studied Thomas with disappointment. 12 years, Thomas. 12 years of exemplary service. Don't throw it away for some misguided sympathy. "It's not misguided," Thomas replied, stepping protectively in front of Ayanna. "This girl has committed no real crimes. She's an orphan trying to survive, and she deserves a chance at a proper life." "She's Apache," Forrester snarled. "That's crime enough around here." The confrontation drew a crowd, and Thomas could see fear and anger in the faces of the townspeople. Arizona in 1892 was still raw with memories of Apache raids and frontier violence. The average settler saw no distinction between hostile warriors and peaceful individuals. Apache meant danger, period. "Marshal McKenna!" came a new voice from the crowd. Thomas turned to see Judge William Crawford pushing through the gathered people. Crawford was known as a fair but stern enforcer of territorial law. "I understand you've been derelict in your duty." "I've been following my conscience, Your Honor." "Your conscience doesn't override territorial law. You were sent to apprehend a fugitive and escort her to San Carlos Reservation. Instead, you've brought her here claiming she's family." Thomas felt the moment slipping away from him. "Judge, if you would just listen to her story." "I don't need to hear stories, Marshal. I need to see justice done according to the law." Crawford gestured to Ayanna. "Young woman, step forward." Ayanna moved with dignity despite the hostile crowd surrounding her. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I am Ayanna of the Mescalero Apache. I have taken nothing that was not freely given or desperately needed. I have harmed no one. If it is a crime to exist as my people have existed for 1,000 years, then I am guilty." "It's a crime to steal, to trespass, and to resist lawful authority," Crawford replied. "You're also in violation of reservation boundaries established by federal treaty." "Treaties my people never agreed to," Ayanna said quietly. "Forced on us after our villages were burned and our families killed." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces showed sympathy, but others grew harder at her words. Thomas stepped forward. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that you allow me to take responsibility for this girl. I'll post bond, guarantee her behavior, ensure she causes no further trouble." "Marshal McKenna," Judge Crawford said sternly, "you're in no position to make requests. By failing to execute your lawful orders, you've placed yourself in violation of your oath of office." Sheriff Harrison stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Thomas, I'm going to have to ask for your badge and your weapon." The crowd fell silent as Thomas slowly unpinned the deputy marshal's star from his vest. The metal felt heavier than it ever had before as he handed it to Harrison along with his service revolver. 12 years, Harrison said sadly. "Why throw it all away?" Thomas looked at Ayanna, then back at his former boss. "Because some things matter more than a badge, Bill. Some people deserve protection even when the law says they don't." Judge Crawford consulted with several community leaders before announcing his decision. "The girl will be escorted to San Carlos Reservation as originally ordered. Former Marshal McKenna will face charges of dereliction of duty and obstruction of justice. This court is adjourned." As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, one of the few people in Riverside who had always treated him with genuine respect. "Thomas," she said quietly, "what you did was right, even if it wasn't legal. Right doesn't seem to count for much these days, Doc. It counts for everything. Don't let them make you believe otherwise." That evening, as dusk settled over Copper Ridge and the last light faded from the dusty horizon, Thomas sat in the dim, cold cell of the town jail, awaiting his transport to the territorial courthouse. The weight of the past few days pressed heavily on his shoulders. His badge gone, his reputation in shambles, and his future uncertain. The sound of boots echoed in the hallway, and he looked up just as the door creaked open. Ayanna was brought in quietly by the sheriff, her wrists bound but her posture straight, her chin held high with the dignity of someone who refused to be broken. She was to spend the night in the adjacent cell before being taken to San Carlos Reservation the following morning. The sheriff, moved perhaps by something he had witnessed in recent days, gave them a few minutes alone. Thomas rose slowly and stepped to the bars that separated them. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and rough with guilt. "I thought I could protect you." Ayanna didn't hesitate. "You did protect me," she replied, her eyes calm. "For 3 days, I felt safe. I knew what it was to have someone care, to have a father again, even if just for a little while. That's more than I ever imagined when I woke up alone in that cave last week." He gripped the bars tightly. "This isn't over. I swear it. I'll find a way to get you out of San Carlos. I don't know how, but I'll try." She stepped closer, her voice softer now, yet steady. "Thomas," she said, using his first name for the first time, and in that moment it felt like a gift. "You've already given me more than freedom. You showed me that not all white men see me as less. You showed me that justice, though rare, can still shine through even when the law itself fails. That truth will stay with me, no matter where they take me." They stood in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the town fading into the background. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, as if the sky itself mourned what was being lost. As they prepared to part, perhaps forever, Thomas understood something profound. In his desperate effort to save Ayanna from injustice, it was she who had saved him. Through her presence, her quiet strength, and her willingness to trust, she had reminded him of who he once was, and who he could still be. He had lost his badge, the symbol of his authority and identity, but he had regained something far greater, his soul. The next morning came too soon. Grey clouds hung low as 2 wagons waited outside the jail, one bound for the courthouse, the other for San Carlos. Neither spoke as they were led from their cells, but just before climbing into their respective transports, they turned and locked eyes across the muddy street. In her gaze, Thomas saw not fear or defeat, but unwavering determination. In his, Ayanna saw no self-pity or regret, only a quiet, resolute promise: this isn't the end. Their story had begun in chains, some visible, others invisible, but no less binding. Legal chains that branded Ayanna as a ward of the state, a problem to be contained rather than a person to be heard. Cultural chains that marked her as an outsider, her voice dismissed before she even spoke. Emotional chains that bound Thomas to a past filled with regrets, compromises, and the slow erosion of everything he once believed about justice. And yet, in the span of just 3 days, something unexpected had taken root. Something fragile but unshakable. From shared silence and whispered truths, from bruises borne and kindness given freely, something stronger than law or blood had bloomed between them. They had stood together not as captor and captive, not as oppressor and oppressed, but as 2 human beings who recognized each other's pain and chose, against every pressure of the world around them, to respond with compassion. A disillusioned lawman who had forgotten the purpose of the badge he wore, and a hunted Apache girl who had every reason to hate, but chose instead to hope. Thrown together by fate, injustice, and the indifferent machinery of a broken system, they had become something rare. Allies not just in survival, but in meaning. In a world that demanded obedience, they had chosen conscience. In a time that prized order over empathy, they had chosen each other. And in a system built on rules, they had found the courage to break them. for the sake of something deeper, dignity, humanity, and the radical idea that love, even the quiet, familial kind, could be more powerful than protocol. As the two wagons creaked into motion, rolling away in opposite directions, one toward steel bars and the other toward fenced lands, a heavy sense of finality settled over the town square. But beneath that solemn weight, something else stirred. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not closure, but continuity, because what Thomas and Ayanna had shared could not be confined by distance or erased by time. They did not part with despair, but with memory, and more importantly, with conviction. They carried with them the imprint of what they had lived, the laughter under rain, the trembling hands reaching through cell bars, the moments when silence spoke more than words ever could. They carried the knowledge that even in a place as barren and divided as Copper Ridge, change was possible. For 3 days, they had walked side by side through storm and flame, through judgment and uncertainty, bound not by circumstance, but by choice. And though the road ahead would pull them apart, both Thomas McKenna and Ayanna would carry forward the flame they had lit together. It was a small flame, perhaps, but it burned with the clarity of truth. And in a world long darkened by fear and division, even a single steady light was enough to make people look up. They had not won in the way others measure victory. No medals, no titles, no grand celebrations. But in choosing love over law, in choosing what was right over what was safe, they had planted something lasting. A legacy born not of blood, but of bravery. A story passed on not in records, but in memory. And maybe, just maybe, that flame would spread. Because sometimes the smallest acts of courage echo the loudest. Sometimes defiance is quiet and healing begins in the rain. And sometimes all it takes to begin rewriting history is two people brave enough to see each other fully and refuse to look away.